Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be across this beautiful blue-green globe of ours. Welcome to Real News Live. This is a special Saturday edition live stream. I'm your host, Mike Bara, in Las Vegas, Nevada. And the reason we're doing this show today is I wanted to give you guys some insight as to what is really going on with one of the most controversial issues in the news today on January 24th. 2026. Now, this is really, it's based on a lot of stuff. It's based on a book I wrote 15 years ago called The Choice, going to be 16 years this year, and why all of the information in that book is now suddenly relevant again. So just to remind you as we get going here, you can always rumble rant and super chat over on the YouTube side of the house. If you would like to, let me get over there and make sure that I am monetizing the content. Okay, good. Actually, no, I'm not. Let me reload that. All right, monetization on. No, I'm not going to curse or swear. Okay. All right, so this information is not something you're going to hear anywhere else. I call this channel Real News Live for a reason, because I give you the real news and the real story and what's really going on that 99.999% of the public and the conspiracy media and everybody else has no clue what's happening. So I'm going to fill you in today on exactly what is going on with Greenland, why it is critically important, not just to the future of the United States, but the future of the entire human race, and what we're going to expect in the next probably the next decade, the next few months. All right, so let's get started. And I'm going to add this to the stage and basically tell you what's going on here. This is about what the Golden Dome really is. We think it's a missile defense system. I'm going to tell you that's not what I think it is. I think it's something completely different. And we're going to talk about why, what, and how as we go through this process. Okay, everybody knows what happened at Davos this week, which is that President Trump went there into the snake pit, into the lion's den, and he addressed everyone there, all of the globalist delegates directly. And what he basically told them is, you're done, we're finished, we're not putting up with your nonsense. This was just after he pulled out of the UN Global Climate Initiative. He basically called them out on their environmental bullshit, and he called them out on a whole bunch of other topics, including Greenland. And he said, we are going to make a deal for Greenland. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, but when I say we're going to do it, you know we're going to do it. That's exactly what he meant when he said that essentially to the delegates. Now, as soon as that speech was over, where he basically laid down the law and said, there's no case for Greenland being part of Europe. There's no case for Greenland being held by Denmark. The case is really strong that it should be United States territory, and we are going to buy it from them and pay Denmark a handsome price. So immediately after that, there was, as Trump put on Truth Social, a very important, productive meeting with the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, and we formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. That's critical. This solution, if consummated, will be a great one for the United States of America and all NATO nations. Based upon this understanding, I will not be imposing the tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect February 1st. Additional discussions are being held concerning the Golden Dome as it pertains to Greenland. Further information will be made available as discussions progress. Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and various others as needed will be responsible for the negotiations, so on and so forth. Now, of course, immediately after that happened, the memes started popping up. Trump changing the name of Greenland to Orange Land. Add Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal to your cart. We've already basically got the Panama Canal. We have the framework of an agreement in Greenland. Albertans are soon going to vote to secede from Canada. Canada is coming down next, probably within the next year. The situation is going to change dramatically. And of course, Trump promised earlier when he talked about Greenland, I promise not to do this to Greenland, build a Trump hotel in Greenland. But the reality is this is what the future is going to look like. The entire northern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere of the Western hemisphere, the northern part of the Western hemisphere is going to be absolutely controlled by America. All the shipping lanes, the military bases, all of that stuff stretching from Alaska to Iceland, basically. And I think when he said Iceland, he slipped up and said Iceland. I don't think that was accidental. I think that was in the back of his mind. That was like a Freudian slip where he's basically saying we're going to include Iceland as part of this as well. But the purpose of this is to take control of the Arctic region. Why? The Arctic region is now more important for shipping and all these other things economically. We hear all this stuff about the rare earth minerals and so forth that are in Greenland, but those are not easy to access. It'll be a very expensive process. It may not even be worth it economically. That's why it hasn't been done so far. So the real reasons behind acquiring Greenland, and under whatever terms we do acquire it, the sole purpose of that really is the military. Now, why would it be a military purpose? Well, all you have to do is look at the Arctic Circle, and you can basically see why this is so important. The United States lies south of Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and eventually Iceland. Russia is on the other side of the Arctic Circle, and beyond Russia, of course, is China, our other geopolitical strategic enemy, along with Russia. Or are they? That's an interesting question, one which we probably aren't going to answer today. But the reality is, of course, is that the Russians, NATO, and the US have many, many military bases in the Arctic region. We have a bunch in Alaska. We have some in northern Canada. Those are in danger because the communist dictator, the fake prime minister of Canada, who was not elected by the Canadian people last year, it was a fraudulent election, is now trying to align himself and make deals with China because not only is he a communist, he is getting paid off by communist China to do that. So China has, my friend the mechanic lives in Canada, lives in BC. He has sent me reports of Chinese military just across the border in Canada, preparing for, yes, a ground invasion of the United States. That is not out of the question. So Canada is going to have to be cleaned up. Carney is going to have to be removed. New governments are going to have to be put in place. Ones that have been elected, and the Chinese are going to have to be expelled from the Western Hemisphere. That is, without a doubt, critical to the future of the planet. But as you can see from the map, what we don't have is much of a military presence in Greenland. And that is something that will change with the new agreement that has now been put into place. The reasons why are seemingly obvious. If there was going to be a Russian or Chinese attack using ballistic missiles or hypersonic weapons on the United States, on Washington, D.C., they would have to come from Russia over the Arctic Circle and hit Washington, D.C. Now, the problematic aspect of this is that the easiest way to defend them, to put up a Golden Dome missile defense, is to have bases in the Arctic. Why? Because a ballistic missile has a parabolic trajectory, which goes up and reaches its apogee, the highest point, right about the Arctic Circle. So at that point, they are basically floating slowly and easier to target before they accelerate and come down to hit. So Greenland is important for that reason, and I'm not disputing that that is important. However, the most likely Russian pass to the United States go right over Greenland. So Greenland has been a weak spot in the U.S. missile defense system. We've got Alaska to protect the West Coast. We now will have Greenland to protect the East Coast better. And as you look at this, you can see that were you to create military bases in Canada and Russia, you can intercept any Chinese or Russian ICBMs or hypersonics much, much earlier and at their slowest and easiest to target points. That's really important, but I got to be honest, I don't think that's what's actually going on. If you remember the day that Trump gave his speech in Davos, it was also reported that there was going to be a massive geomagnetic storm that was going to hit because the sun had unleashed a massive solar flare. On January 19th, 2026, the day of President Trump's speech, G4 geomagnetic storm stemmed from an 1.9 solar flares, coronal mass ejection, propelling charged particles, plasmas, into Earth's magnetosphere at speeds up to 2,000 kilometers per second, resulting in widespread auroral displays as far south as Texas. We didn't get any here in Vegas, but it was cloudy anyway. At 37,000 feet over Manitoba, pilots witnessed undistorted plasma flows, highlighting ionospheric disturbances without atmospheric scattering. Well, that's a lot of technical jargon. What does that mean? What that means is if the sun let off a massive solar flare, which it's been known to do in the past, including the 1859 Carrington event, which if it happened today would basically wipe out Western civilization. It would wipe out all the electronics, all the internet stuff. Most of it would be fried by a coronal mass ejection of that size. So what happens is when these solar flares hit the Earth, the highly energized, ionized plasmas hit the magnetic field of the Earth, and they are deflected around by the magnetic field to the weak points in the defense system of the Earth, which is at the poles, both north and south. And that is what happened the other day. Now, within days of that, the most massive weather system began to form or be predicted to form over the United States. You could literally use this as a weather weapon to paralyze the United States. We are being hit now as we speak on Saturday and Sunday with a massive snowstorm, which is going to create power outages, power lines being down. A good reason why we need to spend a couple $1 trillion to bury every single power line in this country. That's something we should have been doing years and years and years ago. So people will tell you that there is no connection between the solar flare and this massive weather formation. They are wrong. That is bullshit. I can point you back to solar flares and eclipses that have created geomagnetic and powerful storms all over the Earth, including, don't forget, after the eclipse a few years ago, we had 3 massive hurricanes form at 19.5 degrees in the Atlantic Ocean and hit Puerto Rico 2018 or 2019 with massive force connected to the hyperdimensional physics process that I talk about in my 15-year-old book known as The Choice by Mike Bara. So this is connected. The huge solar flare hits, the United States gets devastated with a massive storm. And if it was the summertime, this storm would have been lightning, hurricanes, and tornadoes. In the wintertime, it is going to end up being a snowstorm. So that's exactly what we have seen formed. So there is a connection that nobody wants to admit in the sciences because it changes our view of everything, including the so-called electric universe theories of Immanuel Velikovsky, which are, a lot of it is wrong, but a lot of it is right and correct and needs to be taken seriously. So that's the situation we find ourselves today. The problem with solar flares is that while this one was strong, it was not massive. As I pointed out, it was not as big as the Carrington event. However, there have been apparently very massive, very dangerous solar flares in the Earth's distant past. One of the scenarios is something called the Z-pinch solar flare scenario, which according to certain inscriptions was scheduled to happen around 2012. And has happened at times before. According to certain ancient cave paintings, the sky was on fire 10,000, 12,000 to 14,000 years ago, which depict plants and animals and the skies all seemingly on fire. This is something they actually saw. Now, what is this related to? Well, our friends over at the Y-Files, and I hope I have your permission to play a little clip from your great video, AJ and Hecklefish, have had something to say about this. And what they say is that these ancient events had something to do with electricity and plasma energy. So what I want to do is pop out to their video, Gravity is a Lie and Nothing is Real. Let's pop over to that video and play this little clip right now. Hopefully you'll be able to hear the audio.
The Grand Canyon. Ancient cultures recorded evidence of this lightning and other plasma discharges. The Lascaux Cave in France has cave art that's 17,000 years old. These images are extremely detailed, very realistic, and very accurate. So why does later art become crude, with men being depicted as stick figures? It's because these are not drawings of men. Notice how the arms always appear outstretched, and there are dots on either side of the figure. These are the same all over the world. So what is this? The answer comes from Anthony Peratt, a plasma physicist. Peratt shows us an animation of a plasma discharge. The central column is the axis. Around the axis is a torus or donut-shaped ring of charged particles. The top is called a champagne glass, the bottom is called a squashed bell. To an observer, the shape is transparent, but there are places where the plasma is most dense.
Holy sh**.
This is the shape drawn by ancient cultures around the world. The reason they recorded it is because they would have seen this as a giant glowing object in the sky.
Like a god.
Exactly. These plasma discharges would have been loud and bright and violent, and could have easily been construed as gods battling in the heavens. Eventually, the lightning stopped and the war ended. Saturn, Mars, and Venus moved into their current orbits, giving us the sky that we know today. Now, it's an amazing story, but it goes against everything we've been taught about gravity, the solar system, and all of mainstream cosmology. In order for this theory to be taken seriously, someone would have to prove it. So someone did.
And that someone, by the way, is going to be me. Okay, so thank you to AJ and all the guys over at the Y-Files for this great segment, and hopefully you don't hit me with a copyright. All right, so what he's saying is that the axis is where these highly charged plasmas fire in a very direct vector into, like, let's say, a magnetic field stream. That is the Z-pinch. The Z-axis is what that means. On a Z-axis, it hits a magnetic field. And what you get is this effect, which is depicted in all this cave art from all over the world. The reason this cave art exists is because people actually saw this in the sky in ancient times, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15,000 years ago. But what exactly are they looking at? What exactly do these shapes mean? They mean that the Earth was hit with massive solar flares. Solar plasmas are striking the Earth's magnetic field and causing these effects to be seen from the ground. Now, that in of itself is not that unusual. It has apparently happened before in human history, and yet we are still here. And the old theory, the mythology that we have is that we've always just kept evolving, kept moving along, and became modern man. But what if that's not true? In the choice, I examine the possibility that human history has gone up and down and up and down and up and down 3 or 4 times, as the Hopi say, that we have been basically exterminated by various methods, by various means, flood, fire, wind. There have been all these different possibilities for how the human race became extinct. You look at the ruins on Mars, you look at the ruins on the moon that I have showed people for decades now. Those appear to be human architecture. So what if they were not aliens that built the face on Mars and the bases on the moon? What if they were previous versions of humanity that were even more advanced than we are today? That's an interesting theory, except it creates one very problematic question for science, which is why science and NASA won't take it seriously. The question then becomes, what happened to them? Well, if what happened to them was extinction by a massive Z-pinch solar flare effect, that's pretty scary. Now, as I said in the book, The Choice, the Z-pinch solar flare is the idea, comes from the notion that the sun will somehow get excited to the point that it unexpectedly flares up and sends out an enormous coronal mass ejection, which basically fries the planet. Because of oddities in the Earth's magnetic field, this flare will be drawn down through the poles. the weakest part of the Earth's protective magnetic field, which normally protects us from such stellar eruptions. What makes the Z-pinch scenario unique is that under certain exotic conditions, the particles in the magnetic field of the Earth can become ionized and excited into a state called a plasma, and the superheated gas would be captured and surround the Earth at the poles and the equator for possibly days, weeks, or even months. What exactly would happen to the Earth if the skies were on fire for months on end? The idea was primarily put forth by the physicist Dr. Paul Laviolette in the 1980s. He believed that the center of the galaxy periodically exploded, sending out bursts of gamma-ray energy that he called the galactic superwave. Although Earth's magnetic field would normally protect us from such a distant burst of radiation, Laviolette also speculated that the local area outside our solar system was filled with ice and dust, and that these bursts of energy pushed large quantities of interstellar dust into the interior of the solar system, causing the sun to choke on it and begin to flare up. He later argued that such an occurrence happened 12 to 13,000 years ago, and that is what the cave paintings are depicting. Now, there has been some support for his ideas. Most people don't know this or even make this connection, but I'm going to hit you with some facts. On the Apollo 11 mission, which was the first to land humans on the surface of the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made observations of what they called glazed donuts on the moon. A 1969 scientific paper by the brilliant Dr. Thomas Gold concluded that the glazed donuts were clumps of moon dust that had been subjected to rapid and high-intensity heating, resulting in a glass layer covering the clumps of moon dirt. Gold placed the dating as sometime in the previous 30,000 years. That could be this week, last week, 1,000 years ago, or 12 or 13,000 years ago. In order to create the glazed donuts on the surface of the moon, the sun would have had to emit on the order of 100 times its normal heat energy output for a period of between 10 and 100 seconds. Such an event, a solar flare, hitting the unprotected Earth would have scorched the planet, possibly boiled many of the oceans, and caused extinctions on a massive scale. Whether or not the Z-pinch effect would have grabbed the solar flare and held it over our heads for months at a time is debatable, but Gold did conclude that either the sun periodically flared up in this manner, perhaps every 10 to 15,000 years or so. So what does this mean? Well, it's very interesting because back in 1961, there was a movie that came out called Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And in that, the Van Allen radiation belts had been ignited somehow, some way. Nobody really knew how. And they had caught fire and were burning the Earth. This movie starred Barbara Eden, Peter Lorre, Frankie Avalon, Walter Pidgeon as Admiral Harriman Nelson, and later became an Irwin Allen TV series. It was about a independent submarine, not really dependent or associated with any country. And in the film, the submarine sea view has been under the sea for quite some time. And when it emerges, the sky is on fire. Now, where Allen got this idea from, I'm not really sure. But it is basically, the movie was dismissed at the time because it was thought that this idea was ridiculous. The Van Allen radiation belts cannot catch fire. How is that going to happen? And the point of the movie, the climax, is where basically the sea view moves to a certain point that Admiral Nelson has calculated in the Pacific, launches a nuclear weapon. The nuclear missile blows up in the Van Allen belts and burns out the fire, basically stuffs it in the fire. Kind of an interesting concept, but it was basically called ridiculous at the time. A ridiculous premise. But here's the thing. It's not ridiculous. It's actually possible. While our magnetic field does protect us from solar flares, and while there may have been a time in the past when something like the Z-pinch solar flare occurred, that doesn't mean it will happen anytime soon, I concluded in the book. Now, it can be argued that something had to end the last ice age around 13,000 years ago, and that a flare that was captured in a Z-pinch type scenario could certainly have raised global temperatures and melted the ice. However, we are also in an interglacial period where the Earth basically gets warmer. These have been recorded in the geologic past. So what is going on, and what does this have to do with fire in the sky and Trump wanting to acquire Greenland? Well, I will tell you. In Gakona, Alaska, there is an experimental array of antennas called HAARP, the High Amplitude Active Auroral Research Project. It was run by DARPA initially. It has since been turned over to a local university, which says that they are using it to do experiments with bouncing low frequency signals off the ionosphere to communicate with submarines deep beneath the sea. It has a military application, but HAARP was the prototype. The interesting thing about HAARP is that other devices were built by the United States in Puerto Rico, and Russia and the Europeans also built similar devices. And the idea behind the device is that it sends these low frequency signals out, bounces off the ionosphere, and you can communicate with subs under the sea at various distances, and nobody can tap into those communications. Pretty interesting stuff. And it does have a military application. And this whole thing was put together in the early 1990s. So obviously we are very, very more advanced than that at this point. The question is that really HAARP's true purpose? Is that really what the experiments were all about? Well, as I wrote in The Choice 15 years ago, what HAARP does in essence is harden the ionosphere, the layer of ionized plasma that exists between the upper layers of Earth's atmosphere and the magnetosphere, the protective magnetic field of the Earth. While the magnetic field does a fine job of protecting us from normal levels of harmful solar radiation like X-rays and other types of radioactive particles, it is weakest at the poles. And as we have learned, that is where a huge solar flare could leak through the protective layers of the magnetic field and possibly set the Van Allen belts on fire with superheated ionized plasma and or scorch the skies above the Earth. Because the ionosphere is charged by the solar energy that leaks through the magnetic field, that essentially acts as a last line of defense from these harmful solar flares. By enhancing the ionosphere, which is what HAARP's public literature admits it does, HAARP has the theoretical capability of adding an extra layer of protection in a Z-pinch scenario. So what HAARP, by its own literature, does is it hardens the ionosphere to make it easier to bounce these low-frequency signals off of and communicate with far distant ships at sea and even under the water. So the question is the hardening of the ionosphere in the Arctic region, mind you, is that HAARP's secondary function, a side effect, or is it the primary purpose of the research? And is the communication scenario just a misdirection to keep you from understanding why HAARP was really built? Now, according to the published fact sheets on the project, HAARP is supposed to operate in a 3.6 million megawatt range. By contrast, a typical terrestrial radio station in a major city operates at a mere 50,000 watts. Now, while 3.6 megawatts may seem like a lot, it really isn't enough energy to make a significant impact on the ionosphere. However, HAARP has over 180 operating antennas. And at this level, HAARP could theoretically increase the strength of the ionosphere to the point that North America could be protected in the event of a Z-pinch solar flare. It could also theoretically at least be used to keep the magnetic poles from slipping too close to the geophysical pole and causing the crust ripping scenario that the RAND Corporation was so concerned about in the 1960s. And I tell you about that study in the book as well. Whether or not this is actually being used for this purpose is pure conjecture on my part. Well, I'm taking it now and saying it's no longer conjecture. This is what's going on. Now, other facilities have sprung up elsewhere. There's one called the IceCat Ionosphere Heating Facility near Norway, funded by the European Union. The Russians have built the Sura Ionospheric Heating Facility near Novgorod. And the U.S. also maintains a second HAARP-like facility near the Arecibo Radio Observatory in Puerto Rico, the X-Radio Observatory. It doesn't take much to look at a map and realize that if the true purpose of HAARP is to protect against an incursion from a Z-pinch plasma solar flare event, then these locations would have the effect of protecting the United States, Western Europe, and Russia from the effects of such an occurrence. So now you begin to understand why Greenland is more important and what might really be going on here. So when Trump says Golden Dome is a missile defense system, he's not telling you the whole truth. I do not know for a fact of other HAARP-like facilities being constructed around the world or in the Arctic, but I am convinced 100% that the true purpose of acquiring Greenland and Canada, which is going to fall in the next year, is to build a series of military bases that have these HAARP-like facilities. Now, if they are found out that we are building these at our new military possessions in Greenland and Canada to create basically a ring of defense all around the country and North America itself, they're going to say, well, it's for communications. There's all this trade going on. There's all these submarines. The Arctic has become militarized. That's the excuse. The reality is, I believe, is that based on last week's solar flare, the reason why there is an increased urgency to get these negotiations done is so the United States can build itself not a missile defense Golden Dome, but a solar flare defense system made up of a sequential series of HAARP-like devices whose sole purpose is to harden the North Pole against an incursion of superheated plasma, which could scorch the entire planet Earth, apparently as it did 12,000 years ago. That's what's really going on here. Now, a couple of points. The reason why Trump has pushed to acquire Greenland is because obviously there is concern that this Z-pinch solar flare event is coming. There's probably also concern about the magnetic poles. And if you read my book, if you read The Choice, basically what it says is the only problem we have with the crustal slip is when the physical pole and the magnetic pole align. Then you can have this crustal slip situation, which is a really bad day for everybody. We don't want that to happen. So various HAARP devices could be used to manipulate the movement of the magnetic poles so it doesn't align with the geophysical pole. But the main purpose is to create this hardening effect of the ionosphere at the North Pole. Now, what about the South Pole? Yes, it could still leak through there, but the southern part of the U.S. is going to be protected by the Puerto Rican defense systems, the one that was built there. That will protect the southern part. It's also going to be up to the southern hemisphere nations to build their own HAARP-like devices to protect themselves. The other good news is this. This was a big solar flare. It caused this massive storm that we're going to go through this weekend. And that is a clear danger. And if you go back and look at that, if you look at, I believe, the 6th extinction episode of the Y-Files, you will also see that HAARP-like devices can have an effect on weather and earthquakes and all kinds of other things. But if this were coming next week, this would have already been done a long time ago. The fact that Trump is taking the time to negotiate a fair deal, to get Denmark to buy into it, to get the people of Greenland to accept U.S. bases on Greenland, indicates to me that it's not happening anytime soon. And by that, I mean within the next 10 years. If this thing were coming next year, 5 years from now, before the next election, we would be far more aggressive in obtaining the territory and building the defensive systems. But as it stands now, as you look back to the Arctic Circle, we are going to be very well prepared with a series of HAARP-like devices stretching from Alaska to probably Iceland, from not just missiles and missile defense, we're going to be protected from a Z-pitch solar flare coming down through the poles and scorching our country. That to me is clearly what the purpose of the acquisition of Greenland is really all about. Now we shall see. However, I guarantee you that there are going to be HAARP devices built at these various military bases that we are going to acquire in Greenland. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. And I think based on this week's information, the storm itself, I think it is now a priority. But it's a priority to protect the people of the United States from what could be a civilization-ending event of a Carrington-like solar flare. These things can evolve very quickly. However, it looks to me like they're not in a mad rush to do this, so I expect it to be sometime over the next 10 years. So let me go through the chat a little bit and take a few questions if there are any. Don't forget to like, subscribe, super chat, and Rumble Rant. I don't see any Rumble Rants in here. It would be nice if I got one. Oh, there's a $5. There's a $5 super chat. Thank you very much. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this incredible information. Yeah, it's all in my book, but nobody's putting it together except me. And that's when I decided I have to make a video. Hi, Frederica. How are you? Lots of highs. Good afternoon. Rosemary is here. Hi, Rosemary. Just a lot of hellos. Mike, where is the curve on your globe? 8 inches per mile squared is nothing but a lie. Have Dave Wise on your good show. I had him on. He's an idiot. Okay? He's an idiot. Maps don't even make sense. Air routes don't make sense unless the Earth is a globe. So I had Dave on. I had Flat Earth Dave on. He's just really not very bright. Just really, yeah, not that great. Let me show you. Okay. This is the Earth. This is what it looks like. When you look at Google Earth, you can see that a series of HAARP devices all the way through Canada and stretching to Alaska would create a protective dome, a protective shield over the Arctic Circle and protect us from any solar flares. Now, people ask, well, what about Russia and Europe? And that's their problem. Let them do their own thing. But that is why I believe you see the increasing militarization of the Arctic Circle. Is everybody wants to have a military presence there, so everybody can have a HAARP-like defense built in their country. I imagine we're going to protect and market this technology to other nations as time goes on. I've had Dave on. He was really dumb. Mike is reporting on the apocalypse timeline. We're in the golden age timeline. It's not a bad idea to report this, but doesn't necessarily apply to decent people. There's no war in our timeline. I agree, Risky, but here's the thing. In order to have the golden age, we have to be protected from the apocalypse timeline. And by the way, the word apocalypse, which is in the book, The Choice, the word apocalypse does not mean catastrophe or cataclysm or disaster. It simply means to lift the veil. And when you lift the veil on all the corruption in Minnesota and in politics and in international bodies like the World Economic Forum and the international climate agreements, when you reveal that, that's when you have revolutions. So happy birthday. Thanks. It's not till Monday, but I'm going to celebrate a little bit today. Joe, thank you. Happy birthday to you too. When it fries the planet, would that cause mud floods? Yeah, it could. But I tend to think that the Younger Dryas event, 40 days and 40 nights of rain, is when a comet hit the water vapor canopy, which had been around the Earth probably forever, and shattered that. So we shall see. Hi, Karina Hedge from Spain. Hi, Spain. I like Spain. They say Spain is pretty, though I've never been. Another Spanish one, Marita. Love Spain. Want to buy a house there after the RV. I'm not going to go anywhere to. I'm not going to have a place in Europe. Europe needs to do what we're doing in the U.S., which is cleaning all these globalists up. I just saw that you went live. Yeah, I didn't really plan this. I just kind of came in and did it. The The world is a region. We have a minor military base there, but we do not have permission to do the kinds of things we're going to need to do on these bases that we're going to acquire. So thanks. Great show. And thanks for the $5. I appreciate that. I'm not going to say nobody's Mark is doing everything he can. Happy early birthday. How you doing, Jen? Good to see you guys. Okay, guys, that is going to wrap it up. Thanks for being here. I just want to come in and do this video to educate everybody on why Greenland is so critically important. It's not to build a missile defense, although that is going to be part of it. The bigger threat to the world and to the United States is not Russian or Chinese missiles or hypersonics. The real threat is a massive Z-pinch solar flare along the lines of what hit us this week and is now causing these massive weather systems across the United States. That's the bigger threat, and I believe that is what Trump is so intent on acquiring Greenland for, and eventually Iceland and Canada. So we shall see, but I'm guaranteeing you there are going to be more HAARP-like bases and devices built all along the Arctic region now that we have tested the technology with the HAARP system itself. All right, thanks for being here. Appreciate each and every one of you. I will see you guys back on Monday morning. Have a great weekend. Go Seahawks. Bye-bye.